CGS Lords, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here. My objective is very simple. It's really to suggest to you that whilst Manoeuvre has not changed a great deal in terms of its objective, the means and ways are certainly changing, as we have already heard this morning. The driving forces of Manoeuvre can be summarised as fourfold. The idea of parity, for example, the thrashing of solid phalanx walls or bladed weapon-wielding mobs seem to characterise early warfare. But then, famously, as I'm sure you remember, the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC, Epaminondas and the Thebans defeated their Spartan enemies, who had hitherto been pretty much undefeated, in two ways. One, by shock action, namely a cavalry charge, and as you see, I'm cultivating my cavalry hair in celebration of that. And secondly, by working around the flanks. At the time, it seemed revolutionary. Second theme that had driven the idea of manoeuvre was stasis. So many of the early wars of the ancient period were characterised not by open battle, in fact, but by siege warfare, some lasting more than a decade. These impeded battle spaces had to be turned by movement not on one field, but over an entire region. And then there's momentum. To add weight against a much larger enemy, or to exploit the fact that troops on the offensive enjoy better morale, a point that Hattin famously made in the 1870s, the need to keep or pursue an enemy, keep a sword at the enemy's back. These are the processes which have assisted the development of the idea of manoeuvre. But perhaps the most important of all is the fourth one, initiative. I'm now an adopted son of the Rifles, which was a regiment that prided itself on the idea of every rifleman using their individual initiative. That now is true of everyone in the British Army. But at an operational level, it's about probing and off-balancing, allowing one to choose the time and location and strength of an attack to pursue decisive action. But as our colleagues have already pointed out, we should be aware of some of the falsehoods that have crept into aspects of military history. The false distinction of attrition against manoeuvre that was put together largely thanks to Hans Delbrück or even our beloved Basil Liddell Hart. Both of them were a reaction to the First World War. We know that these are interdependent, especially in the use of fires. And the illustration bottom right that I've placed there is, I'm sure you'll know, the Battle of Hattin in 1183, moving now from the ancient to the medieval period. It was a battle rather like blitzkrieg, with the coordination and synchronization of the elements of the Saracen army. It struck deep and unhinged the Crusader forces, and its primary objective was to dislocate the thinking, to discombobulate, if you like, the forces of the Crusaders. And that demoralization by penetration in depth is a hallmark, of course, of manoeuvre. Manoeuvre, therefore, is at its most effective when it exploits the physical, and we would today say cognitive, elements. Our objective is to coerce, to make an enemy compliant to our will. That is a cognitive decision. And today we will use precise force and deception to alter the enemy's mind. Now, manoeuvre has telling definitions. It is, according to the dictionary of my great university, a planned, controlled, and skillful movement to manipulate by artifice or by scheming. We have interpreted that in physical manoeuvre terms to mean the combination with fires to achieve a position of advantage. But that position of advantage is no longer merely in the physical space, as we've been hearing. So today we add to that group information manoeuvre, the continuous and adaptive employment of information to achieve an advantage through virtual and physical space to produce a cognitive outcome, to change the enemy's mind, to compel the enemy to make a choice. And that could be, for example, desisting from the tactics of hybrid warfare. So we end up with cognitive effects, which will be familiar to you, and cognitive outcomes against our enemies. And all of these can be found in our existing literature. Lord Moran, for example, and The Anatomy of Courage, an outstanding publication even today, dating back to the 1940s, reflecting on his First World War experience. But these particular tools are the ones that we will need to seek. In the past, if manoeuvre was about finding the right place on the battlefield, today is about making the enemy think the way we want them to think. To give you an idea that others are already doing this, it's not that new. In November of 2012, the Israeli Defense Force launched an airstrike against Ahmad Jabari, who was the head of Hamas. But it wasn't just an airstrike. It was part of an integrated operation involving land forces, the Air Force, and information manoeuvre. It consisted of deliberate preparation and then the exploitation of fleeting moments that emerged in the virtual space. The threat was to escalate force, to deter Hamas retaliation, and then to launch sustained information operations. The outcomes were very clear. Hamas was deterred and ultimately also in physical space defeated. Information manoeuvre and our integrated action are part of a long history of the British Army, just today with new tools. In 1759, James Wolfe made an unexpected physical manoeuvre up the Heights of Abraham to create an unsettling cognitive effect on the French, defeating them on the plains in front of the city of Quebec. In 1918, as Alan has already pointed out, it was our own commanders who learnt the art of manoeuvre through bitter experience, including Field Marshal Edmund Allenby. He used deception, physical deception. You can see here an illustration at the top of wooden and canvas horses, signals deception, and proxies, namely Arab forces led by T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, used that deception over a 50-mile front to persuade the German and Ottoman commanders in Palestine that he intended to take Amman, but instead launched a lightning, in-depth physical manoeuvre to seize the command and control nodes behind their lines. The outcome was not just a decisive physical victory, but the moral collapse of 3 entire Ottoman armies. And what about 2018? Today, it's about deep penetration of enemy virtual space and a highly integrated approach to influence using our 5 capabilities, the list of which, by the way, is in your pack here. The 5 capabilities of networks, intelligence, cyber, influence, and security. We are conducting this cognitive preparation of our targets through 4 outputs of understanding, persuading, communicating, and protecting. We conduct physical manoeuvre and fires today in support of cognitive objectives, but as I say, as we have always done, using all those 3 dimensions now. And the results are cognitive outcomes where we harness all our defense efforts and other agencies in a unity of purpose to achieve our objectives. So has manoeuvre evolved? Well, it is certainly today obedient to classical and historical maxims. It was always about the physical and cognitive effects together. The virtual dimension today offers exciting new opportunities to create effects and alter minds. That final image on the bottom right is, of course, David beating Goliath. Usually that story is told as one of precise fires, which cheers up all the Royal Artillery officers in the room. But of course, it's not just about precise fires or altering the odds. The real story was what happened next after Goliath had hit the dust. The cognitive effect was to demoralize the Philistines, who had invested all their strength in the person and leadership of Goliath. The cognitive outcome was that they ran away. The Israelites didn't have to fight because they'd already achieved their objectives. In the virtual domain, choice words can have a significant effect, and you know this from your own history. With a more aggressive response, we can produce more useful outcomes if we embrace this virtual dimension fully. We need, as I'm sure CGS will agree, one army, team working, if you like, battle grouping together, with our networks, our intelligence, cyber, influence, security, and yes, all the physical components too. And my final rejoinder is simply to tell you this, as I'm researching a book at the moment about Lawrence of Arabia and his ideas on war. And one telling quote really strikes a chord, I think, with this audience, hopefully this morning. He wrote, 9/10 of tactics are certain and taught in books, but the irrational 10th is like the kingfisher flashing across the pool. It can only be ensured by instinct, sharpened by thought, practicing the stroke so often that, at the crisis, it is as natural as a reflex. And that is what we must do in the virtual domain. Thank you very much.